Greetings fellow Gorehounds and welcome back to another Blood Splattered vlog. And my 2016 catch-up continues with yet another movie about a mother and daughter fighting a mysterious monster that is a metaphor for what they're going through as a family. And I am of course talking about The Monster, a monster movie from last year, which, I mean, I guess that's obvious, the monster is about a monster, ooh. But I wanted to see it last year, but I didn't have a chance to see it because just so much shit got in the way. But I did manage to catch it on Amazon last night, and holy shit, this is another great movie. It's not mind-blowing or anything. At the end of the day, it's a really simple, contained monster movie that lasts about 90 minutes. But even so, it manages to elevate itself beyond your average monster kills everybody movie by actually having a bit of a point. Because really, this movie, kinda like The Babadook or Under the Shadow, is a movie about a mother and child that actually has a central metaphor at the center of it. A central metaphor at the center of it. Oh wow, I am a wizard with words. But with The Babadook itself was essentially a metaphor for grief and loss. Whereas with Under the Shadow, it was about oppression, misogyny, and societal expectations. But with this movie, the monster seems to be a metaphor for abuse and addiction, more specifically alcoholism, and I'll get more into that when we get to the spoilers. But yeah, I highly recommend The Monster. This is a lean, mean killing machine of a movie with two really great leads that are both well acted and well written for the most part. There was a moment here and there where I felt like the logic was a little wonky, and I'll get to that when I get to the spoilers, but it was still within the characters to make a decision like that, so I was willing to roll with it. And the monster itself is really fucking awesome. Like, you can really tell the person who made this movie really loves movies like Jaws with practical effects monsters that are brought to life but kept in the shadows for most of the movie. That's not to say you don't get a good look at it. You get plenty of good looks at it, especially in the last act. But for the first hour or so, it's kept in the shadows, in the bushes, stalking them. And Jesus Christ, this monster is fucking brutal. Like, it is a fucking beast. And I mean that with all the affection. I love this creature. And I also liked, while I could see comparisons to it and real-world creatures like gorillas and lizards and bats, it itself felt like an actually unique monster. I had not seen anything quite like it, at least in any movie recently. And that was really cool, especially since a lot of monsters in movies lately all seem like clones of the Cloverfield monster for some reason. I guess they're all hiring the same creature designer. But this movie didn't look like that. It looked like its own thing, and I really appreciated that. And I actually kind of hope that they make more movies with this monster in the future. Like, I would totally be down for an Aliens-like sequel where there's now multiple of these monsters. So anyway, yeah, I highly recommend The Monster. If you want a monster movie that has a bit of a point, but is also still, like, a fucking vicious, brutal horror movie, then The Monster is definitely one for you. It's also got a lot of suspense. Like I said, there's a whole lot of Jaws in this movie, especially with the way it treats the monster for the first half. But it's still the kind of movie that was done on a really low budget, but you can tell they did a lot with a little. And I will always commend filmmakers that manage to do that. Anyway, my fellow Gorehounds, let us move on to the spoilers. Alright, so basically this movie opens up with a voiceover of a little girl talking about how her mom always told her that monsters weren't real. And to be honest, I didn't really care for the opening and closing voiceovers of this movie. They felt a little too wordy and a little too reminiscent of Alien Resurrection, if you remember the voiceovers from that movie. And I just kind of felt like the movie would have been better served without spelling things out for the audience. I feel like it's all very clear within the movie itself and didn't need the extra explanation. But that's just me. The voiceovers weren't a deal breaker or anything. It's just personal preference, really. But anyway, after the voiceovers, we're introduced to the little girl in the voiceovers, and we're watching her as she cleans up her house, which seems like a fucking hurricane went through it, like a full-on kegger. Like she's picking up beer bottles and pizza boxes and throwing them in the trash, and you're like sitting there going like, oh man, like did some sort of party happen at this house? Is she cleaning up after like some massive like party that like her sister did or something? No, it turns out she's actually cleaning up after her mom, and there was no party. Well, I mean, she might have had a boyfriend or something over or something like that, but mainly it was the mom herself. It's obvious her mom does not clean up after herself and that her daughter has to clean up after her, which is very much indicates the kind of relationship they have. Because as it turns out, her mom is a complete deadbeat and an alcoholic and has some very obvious personality disorders. Like even when she's not under the influence of alcohol, she will go from like loving, nurturing mother to complete bitch in like a second. And she will often force her daughter to do things that she should probably be doing as the mother, but she'll force her daughter to do it because she has too much anxiety to handle it. Which I'm all for having sympathy for people with anxieties. I have anxieties, but I mean, when you're a parent, you've got to take care of your kid. She can't be taking care of you. No matter how much anxiety you have, that's not right. That's fucked up. And it's especially fucked up if the daughter that you're forcing to do all these things for you because you have anxiety and addictions and yada yada yada, that you're also hitting her on the side. Like, what the fuck? Like how in The Babadook, a lot of people had a lot of problems with the boy in that movie. I think a lot of people are gonna have problems getting past the mom in this movie. But trust me, that's actually the point of the story. The whole story is a metaphor for the mom herself. The monster not only represents her personality problems, her anxiety, but also her alcoholism. And by the end of the movie, the daughter has to defeat the monster so that she can escape and be free without the restraints of her mother. While also coming to terms with the fact that she and her mother love each other despite their complicated, toxic relationship. And I kind of liked how the movie wasn't completely black and white there. The mom wasn't a complete and total, just awful monster, even though she was. She still had a bit of humanity in her that kept her, like, from being completely awful. But even so, none of that excuses her behavior one bit, and good God does she deserve what she gets in this movie. But anyway, the daughter wakes up her mom, and it turns out that her mom slept in way late, and she was supposed to drive the daughter to meet their dad. But the mom resents the daughter because she believes that the daughter is never going to come back if she goes and lives with their dad. Which, as the movie goes on, it becomes very obvious why. But anyway, they pack their stuff, and we get a bunch of flashbacks of some of the abuse that they've endured in their relationship, and some of the fights they've gotten into. And in every single one, it's very obvious the daughter is in the right. But then they get in a car crash on their way to their dad's in the middle of the woods. Something hits their car, and then they hit a wolf, but they think they just hit a wolf. But it turns out the thing that hit their car is actually a monster that's hiding in the woods, and was actually fighting with the wolf before they end up hitting the wolf. And this monster ends up killing everyone who comes to their rescue when their car breaks down. Like, the tow truck driver gets viciously mauled, the fucking ambulance drivers just get viciously mauled, and eventually they try to escape in the ambulance, but he ends up knocking out the ambulance and tipping it over, and it ends up rolling down the fucking hill, and then they end up stuck in the ambulance with the monster stalking them outside. And that leads to the final act. And yeah, I basically just described the full hour of the movie in like less than a few seconds flat, but that's how much of a contained thriller this is. It's very simple, it's not that complicated, but it is really well done. Though I will admit, in this final act, there is a plan hatched by the mom that didn't make much sense to me, but did make sense when you realize that she's really bad at making decisions. Because she quickly realizes when she flashes a flashlight at the monster that it's adverse to light. And because of this, she comes up with a plan to light a torch on fire and lure the monster away so that her daughter could get away. Which was a weird plan to me, because it feels like if you're lighting the torch, and that's going to repel the monster, so why not give the torch to the daughter while you run into the woods to lure the monster away? Why keep the torch for yourself and let the daughter run without any protection? But like I said, this mom is making awful decisions left and right, so it kind of makes sense. It's actually within her character to do something this stupid. And in the end, she ends up sacrificing herself to the monster by putting the torch out, and the daughter ends up having to fight the monster all on her own because, of course, that ends up happening. The mom is so bad at this. But in a sense, I do like this plot point for one particular reason, because what I like about it is that it works really well for the metaphor. Because the mom essentially ends up giving in and dying to the monster, the alcoholism, the abuse, the personality disorders. She ends up dying to it. She ends up essentially giving up. But the daughter does not. The daughter ends up fighting it. She ends up defeating it, and she ends up getting away. She ends up doing what her mother tried her whole life to do, but was too anxiety-ridden and fearful to do herself. And I also kind of liked how it's kind of obvious that the reason why the daughter had the courage to do this was because the mom kept forcing her to face all these anxieties that she was too worried to do herself. And while that was still abusive, it kind of shows the double-edged sword there, because on one hand she was 100% abused, but on the other hand it gave her the strength to tackle the monster herself so that she does not succumb to it. Which in a way is true for a lot of people who come from abusive households. It's not uncommon for people to come from a family with a history of alcoholism who choose to not drink at all, because they've seen the effects of alcoholism, so they avoid it themselves. Now granted, it's also entirely possible for someone to come from an abusive household and become an abuser themselves. That's also a very likely scenario, but I kind of like that this movie kind of showed the other side of that, the other potential side. And this also kind of shows what I love about horror movies. It tells stories that other types of genres are afraid to tell. Like, it's very unlikely you're going to see a superhero story that actually tackles an abusive family and an abusive relationship and the toxicity behind alcoholism in a way that is actually very real, that's very raw, and very honest. I mean, sure, in Iron Man 2, Tony Stark was dealing with alcoholism, but it was a very cartoony version of it. His alcoholism, while it made him make very bad decisions, still made him an entertaining, charming guy. Whereas this movie showed that no, there's nothing charming about this mom. There's nothing entertaining about this mom. This mom is horrifying. And while at times you do end up empathizing with her a little bit, you still see what she's doing to her daughter and going like, no, there's no excuse for this. But you're very happy at the end of the movie to see the daughter conquer both the monster of her mom as well as the monster of the beast itself. It's really well done, and like I said, it's only about 90 minutes, so this movie is not a huge investment of your time, but it is 100% packed to the gills with a lot of great content. And as per usual, like, comment, subscribe, and as always, my fellow gorehounds, I'll catch y'all later.